Hey everybody, I'm Jeanette, a self-professed true crime nerd, and welcome to the Law and Murder Podcast, where we're going to be talking about true crime and exonerations. You ready? Let's get started. Hey everybody, I'm back. Sorry for the hiatus. Murphy has been really whooping my family's butt on both sides of my family. I live in Virginia, and I had my mom's side of the family. Someone got very sick, so I had to go to New York, and I drove 6 hours. And then a week later, I had a family member pass away on my father's side, so I had to travel to Florida. So recording was not a priority. I'm kind of eating my words, right? Because I said I didn't want to skip any weeks. Anyhow, this week, the family annihilator that I have is Jeffrey MacDonald. He was an Army medic or an Army doctor in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He was a graduate of Northwestern University and ended up in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. On the morning of February 17th, 1970, Dr. MacDonald called the operator to get a hold of the military police. They didn't have 911 back then, so this was the way to get the police to respond to his call. While he was talking to the operator, he had let go of the phone because he was trying to frantically save his wife. The operator didn't really know what was going on, so she stayed on the line waiting for him to come back. A few minutes later, he gets back to the phone and tells the operator that the military police need to come to his house as soon as possible because there were 3 intruders and a woman in his home, and his family was violently attacked, and he thinks that his family is dead. The operator goes and calls the military police, and they are en route. Close to 4 a.m, the police get to the MacDonald home. The lights were off, and there was no movement or sound in the home. It was very odd that the house was so silent after such a terrifying report. There should have been some noise or some movement going on, but the police still walk up to the front of the home, and they find that the front door is locked. So they go to the back of the home, and through the screen door of the utility room, they can see that the door is wide open. Both police officers go through the door and start to clear the home. They walk through the living and dining room. They notice an overturned coffee table, a plant on the ground, and as they go down the hall to the master bedroom, they can see that there are 2 bodies on the floor. This would be the body of Colette, Dr. MacDonald's wife, and the doctor himself. When the police come to the doctor and the wife in the master bedroom, the doctor at some point regains consciousness and tells the police frantically to look for his children. He doesn't know what happened to them, but he knows that they're in danger, or at least they were. The police leave them there for a second to clear the rest of the home, and they find the 2 girls in their bedroom. They appear to be asleep, but as they walked up to the girls and checked for life, they found that both of them had been stabbed and were dead in their beds. They go back to the master bedroom where the doctor and his wife are, and they start asking him questions. And while this is happening, the doc is regaining and losing consciousness, and the military police officer that's talking to him has to consistently do CPR on him. In between all of this, he does tell them that there were 4 intruders in his home, 3 males and a female with a floppy hat. 2 of the males were white and 1 male was black. He had a jacket on that had Staff Sergeant insignia. The ambulance arrives at the scene, and they take the doctor to the hospital. When he gets there, they find that he has some cuts and bruises on his face and that he was stabbed in the chest, and as a result, his lung was punctured. Back at his home, the military police had started their investigation. When they look at Colette, she is found with her pajama top unbuttoned and another pajama top and some towels on top of her. Her arms are broken, and she has suffered blunt force trauma to the head. She was stabbed 21 times, which will later be consistent with an ice pick as the weapon, and stabbed 16 times with a knife that is found next to her body in the room. Most of the stab wounds are around the chest and throat area, and during the autopsy, they would also find that she had suffered a skull fracture from the blunt force trauma to the head. The word pig was written on the headboard, and there were some pieces of surgical gloves on the pillowcase of the bed next to the word pig on the headboard. There was a chair in the room that had some cuts on the fabric that, for now, we'll call them stab wounds. And later in the autopsy, they would find that Colette was pregnant with her third child. Kimberly, the oldest child, was in her room. She was stabbed 8 to 10 times on the mid portion of her neck, and she had multiple blows to the head as well. Most of her injuries were concentrated on her chest and neck. Kristen, the youngest baby, was found in her room appearing to be asleep. She had 12 wounds on the front of her chest and 10 on her back, and 2 stab wounds were found on her scapula. The scene was very bloody and absolutely disturbing. After they inspect the bodies and remove them from the home, the other evidence they find is a coffee table that's turned over that we talked about earlier. Magazines are under the coffee table, not in front of the coffee table. A plant is on the floor, but the pot that the plant was in is standing upright, not even close to where the plant landed, and the pot was right side up. The doc's glasses are found next to the windows, which would be closer to the front door of the home, and they have blood droplets on them. Outside in the backyard, they found a club with blood on it and an ice pick. Everything was sketched and photographed. It did start raining at some point during the investigation, so they put a box over the evidence until it was able to be collected. Another thing to note was that there were no footprints in or around the outside of the home. After the doc had recovered from his injuries, the police brought him into the station to question him about what happened. He says that he got home from work and started watching television. He ate dinner with his family, did the dishes, and put the kids to bed while his wife was off at a class. She had gotten home around 9 o'clock that evening, and the kids were already in bed, so she took a shower and watched some television with him until she went to bed. Around 2 in the morning, he went to go to bed, but found his daughter was in his bed sleeping with Mama, and she had wet their bed. This was a common occurrence with her, so he went back to the couch to go to sleep. He was woken up about an hour later to screams, and he saw 3 men and a woman in front of him, which totally freaked him out. 2 men were white, as told to the police officers the night of the murder, 1 black male with the staff sergeant insignia on his sleeve, and a woman wearing a floppy white hat. She had long, stringy blonde hair and boots. The men had started beating him, and he had gotten into a struggle with them, and the woman just stood there and kept saying, "LSD is groovy, kill the pigs." While he was in the fight with them, he reports having his pajama top taken off, and the assailant stabbing the pajama top, trying to get at him while the pajama top was wrapped around his hands for protection. He reports having been hit in the head and felt something sharp to his chest. At some point, he thinks that he might have passed out, and when he came to, the intruders were gone. He had gotten up to see if his wife was okay and saw her with all the blood on her, and he put his pajama top on her and started CPR, but he realized that it wasn't doing anything because he felt the air and heard it coming out of the wounds. He then said that he went into each of the girls' rooms and found them dead. He called the operator to get the military police at his home, and he again passed out because of the chest wound. This was the time where the operator was kind of waiting for him to get back on the line. So what he says that he was doing in between that was that he wandered around the house again and tried to revive his wife once more, went into the bathroom and washed his hands, and then got back on the phone with the operator to plead for her to call the MPs to get to his home. He mentions going down onto his hands and knees for air because he felt really short of breath, but there were no bloody fingerprints or handprints on the floor to corroborate this part of the story. After a little while, the police had started getting the results of some of the forensics back. So they call MacDonald back into the station for questioning, and they have him go through the story in more detail, stopping to ask questions about the smallest things. There were 4 things that they really specifically spent their time on because these 4 pieces pretty much convict him of the murders. The 4 things that they found were his glasses, the ones found next to the curtains in the living room, the club that was used to bludgeon his wife and children, the appearance of the living room itself and what he used to clean the dishes with, and the assailants in his home. The glasses that were found in the living room, in theory, should have stayed in the living room throughout the assault of these so-called intruders. And if they were on the coffee table, as he claims they were, because he says that he had been sleeping on the couch, there shouldn't have been blood droplets on the outward part of the glasses. There's something to note here. His family, they all had different blood types, which is very different. And even if there was going to be any blood on his glasses, it should have been his blood. But it wasn't his blood. It was his family member's blood. The club that was found outside of the house had his wife's blood on it and his daughter Kimberly's blood on it as well. The club had paint on it that was the exact match of the paint to his home and some of the paint that was locked in a shed behind his house. It was concluded that this club had come from his home. The living room wasn't a mess like it should have been. There was like 5 magazines under the fallen table. There was no bottom shelf on the table, so it was just like a tabletop with 4 legs, and the magazines, the plant, and the glasses would have been on it. So if there was a struggle, if you think about it, something tipping over, everything would have fallen in front of the table. Instead, the magazines are under, so it looks like the magazines were on the floor and then the table was put on top of it. So the flower pot is kind of standing in front of the table, and then in front of the coffee table is the plant laying on its side, like in perfect condition, like the soil part of it. So if there was a struggle, you would think that there'd kind of be dirt everywhere, but there isn't. The pajama top. The pajama top had 48 slices in it. It was the pajama top that was on Colette when the police found her, but MacDonald admits that it was his pajama top. Remember, he had taken it off during the struggle to defend himself. This pajama top had Kimberly and Colette's blood on it, and if he was using it in the fight that he had and only placed it on his wife, there wouldn't have been both blood samples on the pajamas. There were also pajama fibers because the pajamas were ripped. They were under his wife and under the fingernails of his daughter. MacDonald attributes the blood on the pajama top to the fact that he had checked on his kids after he had called the operator, and he says that he probably instinctually wiped his hands on his top for some reason, and he had no explanation of the fibers under his wife. He said that was out of his realm of expertise, which makes sense. I mean, how would he know anything about fibers? Another thing was that if the fight had happened in the living room, you would think that there would be fibers in the living room because that's where the pajama top was stabbed and broken and ripped. Instead, there weren't any fibers in the living room at all. During the interview, he also mentions that he was on the bed, and this was kind of something that I found while reading the Article 32 transcripts of his interview. At some point, he says that he was on the bed when the intruders were in his home, but then he goes back to say that he was on the couch in the living room the whole entire time. So him being in the room just totally kind of leaves the narrative, which I found kind of funny. It was something I definitely found suspicious, but I mean, I don't know. There's also the gloves that were by the bed where the word pig was written on the headboard, and those surgical gloves matched the kind and type that he had kept in his home that he said that he used to wash dishes with. The Army Investigative Services and the FBI, they were both on the case, and based off of everything that they had heard, they created their own theory about what happened the night of February 17th. So here's their theory. MacDonald was on the couch watching television, just as he had mentioned, and when he went to go to bed and found his daughter in his bed, he also found that the mattress was wet. There was urine on the bed sheets that the investigative team found. So they assumed that he got very angry and started to argue with his wife about his daughter peeing the bed, which probably sparked more arguments, or maybe just a little bit more heated arguments about things that they were holding on to in the past. They think that the abrasions on his face came from a hairbrush that was found on a dresser next to his wife's purse by the front door. The size of the brush and his wounds were pretty comparable, so it was correlated that the brush probably made the wounds on his face. After they start arguing and she hits him in the face with the brush, the fight gets even more heated and he takes the club that he finds laying around the house and hits his wife in the face with it. His daughter Kimberly comes into the room because she was woken up, and she also gets hit in the face and she passes out due to the blunt force trauma on her face. This is suspected due to her broken nose and blood spatter that was found in the master bedroom that matched Kimberly's blood type. He then wraps his daughter into a blanket, brings her into the room, and this is theorized because the blanket has both Kimberly and Colette's blood on the blanket. So the investigators theorized that he picked up his daughter, put her into the room, and then he goes back and kills Colette in the master bedroom. And after he gets done with that, because he's in a fit of rage, he goes and kills his children. He places them both in a sleeping position on their beds and then calls the police for help. The proof of this comes from the footprints that they found leaving Kimberly's room. And they match his, but later on they find that the ridge detail and stuff, they can't really corroborate it because it wasn't a good footprint to, kind of like fingerprints, it wasn't a good sample. He then takes the club and the ice pick that he used to stab and kill his family and throws them into the backyard to make it appear that the intruders left the house and just threw them there. He then grabs a scalpel that he has in his medic bag and he injures himself and then calls the operator for the police to come to the apartment. And he positions himself next to his wife and pretends, or either does, really pass out. And when the police come, everything kind of picks up from there. They also think that the Esquire magazine found in his house under the coffee table inspired his killing. And in that magazine was an article about the Manson murders. In another strange twist, before I get into all the court stuff, we have a woman that claims that she was wearing the white floppy hat and that she did have a stringy wig and the boots on that MacDonald had described. She admits to being in the home. She admits to the three guys being in the home, but she's just a really dicey character that was like super high on drugs. She probably saw this thing on the news and just pretty much made up the whole story. I mean, who knows? But the thing is that she says that she was there, then she says that she wasn't there. She writes letters to people that she was there. When she gets in trouble, she uses the MacDonald case to like get immunity for whatever it was that she did wrong. So I don't really put too much stake on her claims. It just kind of seems like, I don't know, it just sounds a bit out there. But if you want to go ahead and look it up, feel free, by all means. I just didn't really buy the story, but it was definitely another way to look at it. But I think if you're in a struggle with three people and they're coming at you and like you're all high and you're being crazy and like all this, that, and the other, you would think that there would be pieces of the blonde wig, there would be hair samples, all kinds of stuff, all the kinds of like types of evidence that they found in the home from Colette, Kimberly, and even himself. But they found nothing to corroborate that anybody else was in the home. So that's why I don't really buy it. So now we get to the Article 32 hearing. The Army Investigative Services took him, to court-martial, and he goes up to a military court where the judge goes through all the findings that the Army investigative team found. And at the end of the day, the judge dismissed the case on the grounds that there was not sufficient evidence to warrant charges under the UCMJ. So MacDonald gets an honorable discharge out of the Army and moves to New York, where he amazingly goes on many news outlets to tell his story and how the Army screwed him over and that he got his justice and he could have been wrongly convicted. His family and Colette's family, at this point, they had his back. His father-in-law had like a really fishy feeling about what was going on, like him being on the news and all that stuff. So he went and petitioned the Army under the Freedom of Information Act to get the transcripts of the Article 32 hearing. And what was in those transcripts and the stories that MacDonald was telling didn't match at all. So he brought a citizen's complaint to the Department of Justice in 1972. And with persistence to the department, he was able to get a grand jury to hear the case 2 years later to indict him. He was subsequently indicted and was taken to North Carolina because he was living in California at the time, and he got put in jail. He tried to say that he had fell under the double jeopardy rule, and that was denied, but it took a couple years for that to get denied. So once it finally did, it was now 1979. A month later, August 29th, 1979, after 6 hours of jury deliberation, he was convicted of the first-degree murder of his wife and the second-degree murders of his children. He got a life sentence for it. What got him in his trial was the fact that he had said in one of his interviews that he had the pajama top taken off and wrapped around his hands to ward off the intruders from stabbing him. Well, at the trial, the prosecution showed the jury how this could have worked or wouldn't have worked, and the lawyer got a stab wound on his hand because the person that was stabbing the pajama top, the way that he had said it was done, created an injury on his hand that wasn't meant to happen, but it did. And if the stabbing or defense would have happened the way that MacDonald had said that it did, he would have had some lacerations on his hands to corroborate his story, and he did not. So he appeals his case a lot. In 1980, 1 year after his trial had started, he appealed on the grounds that he was denied a speedy trial. He got out of jail on a $100,000 bail, and this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they heard the case. They said heck no, and they rearrested him, and he went right back to jail. He also appealed the case and lost. He appealed it several times. He appealed it in 1990, 1992, 1998, 2006. In 2005, he was denied parole. And in 2010, he tried to appeal the case again. In 1997, there was DNA conducted with all the evidence that was found at the crime scene, and none of it matched Helena, the floppy hat woman, and her boyfriend Greg that she had said was in the house with her. All the DNA that was found in the home was the family DNA. So it kind of goes to say, like, even though this isn't a, 100% guilty... I mean, it kind of went back and forth. Like, the Army didn't take the case, but then the civilian courts did. I don't know. This is pretty brutal. And the fact that, the Army wouldn't even take the case is kind of weird to me, but I don't know what to think about it. I do think that he did it. I think that because... I don't know, when you look at the pictures that I post on Instagram about of the living room, I think you'll pretty much see what I'm talking about. It just seems a little bit unrealistic that there would have been such a big fight in his house and just a coffee table was turned over. But that's just me. In an effort to get this podcast out to you today, I'm going to stop here. I'm just going to tell you that you might want to look up this case for yourself because there is seriously so much information out there that it was kind of hard to put it into a 20-30 minute podcast episode. So this was basically the Cliff Notes version. If you want more information, I'll put the website where I got a lot of my information from. It contains the Article 32 transcripts, the crime scene photos. I would suggest that you do not look at the autopsy photos, y'all. They were very gruesome, and they literally changed, I don't know. They kind of traumatized me a little bit. It was really sad to see the girls. Oh, God. Just don't look at them. It's not going to do you any good to look at them. Reading the autopsy report itself is enough. So yeah, I'll post the website in the show notes. I hope you guys have a good week, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and if you love the show, please leave a review on iTunes, and it would be even better if you shared it with your friends and got the word out. Until next time. Bye.